Hey everyone, welcome back to our study on the prophet Amos, the shepherd from Tekoa. And we are in the middle of a large pericope that covers chapters 3 through 6, which is Israel's punishment and Yahweh's lament. And we've already covered chapters 3 through 4, Israel's punishment. And with this lesson, we continue with chapters 5 through 6, Yahweh's lament. So Yahweh's lament, Amos chapter 5, verse 1 through chapter 6, verse 14. And a quick overview of Yahweh's lament. Israel rejects returning to the Lord. And we have to keep that in the back of our mind as we continue through these next two chapters. Because, trying to grasp the concept of this God that has displayed himself in the book of Amos as very powerful and very capable of many things, to turn around and lament and grieve over Israel. The Lord laments over Israel because in their rejection, they're bringing upon themselves their own demise. So not only did they just completely turn their backs on Yahweh and leave him, and here's Yahweh beckoning them and calling to them to return to him, and they reject him. In addition to all of that, he laments because there's so many things that in that rejection that is causing all this other stuff to happen to Israel. For example, they have convinced themselves that what they do is okay. It's morally and ethically okay, but what they're doing is hurting themselves, as we've already learned in the past couple of lessons. So right there is another reason for Yahweh to lament. Israel cannot see how they are in error. They are so steeped in their pride. So all of this they think is okay. Yahweh needs to grieve over this. And Amos wants to convey that to his audience to know this is the kind of God that they are rejecting, that they're refusing to return to. All right, so here's a outline of chapters 5 through 6, and we're going to start with looking at 5, 1 through 17, grieving well and repenting right. So note the chiastic form, A, B, C, D, and then C1, B1, A1. We're going to split that up into two sections, but I want to be sure that you keep in mind that middle section, D, that we're going to look at today, because that is the focus of this chiastic form. It's the very center of it. That's the use of a chiasm, is that middle part is the main thrust of what's being communicated. All right, and then we'll continue after that in the next couple lessons with woe for the day of the Lord and the epilogue to lament the pride of Israel. All right, but for now, grieving well and repenting right. Chiasm A through D, which is part 11 of our overall study, covering Amos chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. So if you want to pause the video here and read those to familiarize yourself, go right on ahead. All right, so verses 1 through 3, lament of virgin Israel. Hear this word, Israel, this lament I take up concerning you. Amos does not only identify this as a matter to report, but also a lament. All right, so here he is, hear this word, Israel. He's calling out to them to listen to what he has to say. And what he's saying is that this God of ours, this Yahweh that we've already identified as something very, very powerful, that he is lamenting for a reason. And it's not just a report. It's, hey, this is what's happening. This is the reality of your choices. So what does this lament look like? Amos begins with, fallen is virgin Israel. All right, the personification of Israel as a young maiden only heightens the tragedy. Think of like someone coming of age. There's this excitement about it. There's some, maybe for a parent, there's a lot of nerve-wracking things, but there's this milestone in a person's life that is just absolutely amazing, and it's precious. And here, this is Israel that's personified as that. This is virgin Israel. But what is happening to Israel? They're fallen. So this heightens the tragedy that's happening with Israel. And not only that, they're never to rise again. All right, there's this finality to it. And it's in the superlative language here. So it's not like, yeah, it's going to be really hard, but they'll get it. They'll get through it. They'll come out victorious in the end. But no, it's not. It's never to rise again. All right. So deserted in their own land, implying the military no longer returning after defeat. All right. So the picture here is that Israel has gone out to war, and obviously they did not win. They've been defeated. They're either killed off or they're taken captive. And whatever survivors that there are, they would return home. But not only is there not a home to return to, and if there is not much left there, but what would happen is that they would just be deserted in their own land. And that also is heightened with the next line, with no one to lift her up, all right, which is that there's no other national allies to rescue Israel. So this military, they're going to be left abandoned in their own land. Like, they can go home. They're in their own nation. They're in their own land, but they have nowhere to go when they get there because there's nothing left. And not only that, these other nations that should have been their allies are looking at them and saying, you know what, we're not going up against that powerhouse. We don't want the same result on our hands, on our nation. So they also abandon them and leave Israel without any rescue. The next line, this is what the sovereign Lord says to Israel. All right, there's further emphasis that this lament is from God. All right, it's not just Amos upset that nobody's listening to his preaching or anything like that. This is Yahweh himself saying, I'm lamenting over what is happening here. All right, so what does this lament sound like? Amos continues, your city that marches out 1,000 strong will have only 100 left. Though the exile is devastating, God secures Israel with a hope. Your town that marches out 100 strong will have only 10 left. The exile contains a small remnant, those who seek God and establish justice. Amos's main thrust for his message to Israel. All right, so yeah, even though there's a small remnant that's going to survive everything that's going to happen, and that God is going to secure his nation through these people, this is still something that's horrible. Like, this is a lot of people. Like, I mean, if you do the math, that's technically 90% of the entire nation of Yahweh's is going to be devastated, and there's going to be no coming back from that, not for a long time anyway. The verses continue in verses 4 through 6. Seek and live. All right, this is what the Lord says to Israel. Despite turning from him, God still has regard for Israel. Seek me and live. All right, right here, there's covenant language. There's something that God is conveying that should be, they should be able to recognize as echoing from everything that he's ever written, had Moses write down and ever communicated to his people. All right, seek me and live. This is something that is continuously brought up, and still they continue to reject him. All right, do not seek Bethel. Do not go to Gilgal. Do not journey to Beersheba. All right, contrast this with Amos's sarcastic remarks concerning Bethel and Gilgal in chapter 4, verse 4. All right, he's told, hey, go there and worship, do all this kind of stuff that you do, because that's what you do. That's the kind of sinning that you do. That's the kind of rebellion that you're about. And now he's saying, hey, for real, come on. Do not seek Bethel. Don't go to Gilgal. Do not journey to Beersheba. And the reason being is because it's not going to work. This is not the reason why those places were established. All right, and a side note, a journey to Beersheba is related to the pilgrimage Jews would take to Jerusalem, which was 3 times a year, right? In the Hebrew Pesach, whatever, however you pronounce it. But here, it's like, go to Bethel, Gilgal, and Beersheba. Those were the powerhouses that these areas that they would journey to in order to do these religious things. And here's Yahweh saying, don't even bother. Don't do that, because it's not going to work. You're not using it for what it's actually used for. The verses continue, for Gilgal will surely go into exile, and Bethel will be reduced to nothing. The Israelites would learn two aspects of reverence toward the Lord. They can revere him wherever they are in exile. All right, and they can revere him without any temple practices, reduced to nothing. So take all that into account. Don't go there, because, first of all, you don't even need it. All right, and that brings up a couple thoughts for the church today. Do we go to church because that's the thing that we're supposed to do? You know, that's where we do our worship and all that. That's the place where we're supposed to pray. That's the place we're supposed to get our Bible. And here it's like, yeah, they did the same kind of thing. They went to the temple. They gave their sacrifices. They did this. They did that. They took part in these practices. But what it came down to is that you don't need to do all of that. You don't need those places. And in fact, those places became a byword for everything that had to do with worshiping the Lord. They turned their backs on God by using these certain areas, by using Gilgal and Bethel and Beersheba. All right, so when it comes to today in church, do we know that we can worship God outside of the church building? Do we know that we can revere him wherever we are? Like sitting here right now, whether we're doing a study or just sitting here contemplating, whether we're at work, you know, no matter where we are at, we have the opportunity to revere the Lord. And this is where something that Israel had epically failed in doing. The verses continue, seek the Lord and live. Further emphasis on dire need to turn to the Lord. The words now come directly from Amos rather than Amos relaying the Lord's words, like in verse 4b. All right, so here it is. Hey, as a result of all this that Yahweh has conveyed to us, Amos is saying, seek the Lord and live, echoing every single thing that has ever been documented throughout the Torah and throughout the history of the nation of Israel. Seek the Lord and live. And what is the result then? If they don't seek him, Amos goes into detail there in the next line. Or he will sweep through the tribes of Joseph like a fire. It will devour them. Amos warns of the cost of seeking after anything else. Fire often connotes judgment as well as refinement. So keep in the back of your mind, there's still that remnant. They're still going to be affected by everything that's going to happen. They're going to be taken into exile. So yeah, they're going to be very affected, and that's going to be a fiery experience for them. So this judgment, yeah, there's going to be this judgment, but in addition, it's also going to be a refinement, and it's something that the remnant will need to endure. Here, the fire implies a thorough destruction of what is a faulty reliance. All right, so everything that they relied on, such as Bethel, Gilgal, Beersheba, those things are going to be gone. They're going to be put through the fire, and they're going to be destroyed because they put their reliance on those types of things. The tribes of Joseph is synonymous with the northern kingdom of Israel. So these tribes of Joseph, you know, the nation of Israel in the northern, in the north, are going to be affected by all of this. All right, in the next line, and Bethel will have no one to quench it. No prayer, commerce, or army can stop it. All right, this is only Yahweh is going to be able to stop that or to quench it. So here's the message that is being conveyed here, is that all of this stuff that's happening is a result of the nation of Israel rejecting the Lord. And all this stuff is going to happen to them as a result of their own actions, their own behaviors, their own responses, or ignorance towards the Lord. All right, so that brings us to verse 7, the reason for death. There are those who turn justice into bitterness. Amos does not include the entire nation, but just those, in comparison to the tiny remnant that would remain. Imagine being, you're either, oh, that person, or, oh, that person. And I think that's the kind of image that's happening here. There are those people who turn justice into bitterness, and they're well known, they're renowned. All right, that's the upper class. That's the people that are taking advantage of the weaker individuals that are a part of their own nation. All right, and what do? Turning justice into bitterness is a euphemism for the vile things the upper class had been doing to the oppressed to cause them suffering. And why were they doing that? For their own gain. All right. The next line, and cast righteousness to the ground. They have no regard to seek righteousness, nor put it into practice. Essentially, they have their own means to achieve their own causes and desires. So again, this is something that continuously comes up in Amos, is that, they have their selfish ambition. They are going after something that they should not be going after. And the result is they're harming other people. And as a result, it's harming themselves, because as a complete nation under the banner of the Lord, it's affecting themselves, whether or not they choose to see that. All right, now that brings us to the center point of the chiasm, letter D, in verses 8 through 9. And this is about Yahweh. This is all about who he is, and a bit in comparison to the other gods that they may have tried to start serving or implemented in their temple worship, some of those practices. These two verses may have reflected a hymn that was practiced among the cultic beliefs welcomed into temple practices. All right, so the idea here is, if this was a hymn that they used, it was something that they adopted from other cultic practices that they had welcomed into their temple practices, that had to have been from other cultic beliefs, different false gods, different little g gods. All right, so this hymn Amos is using to convey who the real God is in comparison to all these other little g gods. All right, so verse 8 starts, he who made the Pleiades and Orion. It is Yahweh who aligned the stars, not any other god that had infiltrated Israel. All right, so a quick note before we continue is that this section, verses 8 and 9, are very difficult to translate in Hebrew. And part of the reason is because of that adoption from other different cultic practices and beliefs, such as the Pleiades and Orion. Now, your translation that you might be reading from has Pleiades and Orion capitalized as if it is an actual god. But what's happening here is that Amos is not really concerned with all the stuff that they may believe. He's just correcting. What he's more concerned about is correcting who this God is. He's not arguing about different cultic beliefs or practices or anything. He wants to be sure that this is the identity of who Yahweh is. He is the one who made the Pleiades and Orion. It wasn't these other little g gods. It was Yahweh. He placed those stars in a specific spot that he wanted to, that he needed to, in order to say, this is who I am. All right? He's the one that created it. The verse continues, who turns midnight into dawn and darkens day into night. Yahweh has the power to initiate change, not a god. All right, so here it is, like, oh yeah, there's this one God that he's the one that's in charge of turning day into night and night into day. But Amos is saying, nope, it's Yahweh that does that. Who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out over the face of the land. It is Yahweh that causes climate stability, not a god. So again, it's nothing to do with this little g god who they might assign to the ocean or the clouds or anything like that, or for for their crops or anything. What it is, or who it is, I should say, is Yahweh. It is nothing else that is in control of that. So this is what that Amos wants to convey. This is nothing to do with the little g gods, and they've been duped into believing that that's who it is. And that's why he perhaps is even borrowing from these cultic practices, from possibly from a hymn that they may have used. So what it comes down to is that it's not these little g gods, it is Yahweh. And who is Yahweh? The Lord is his name. And who is the Lord? The God who mourns over Israel. All right. This, even though he's the one that's in control of all of these powerful things, he's choosing to mourn over Israel, who gives life to those who seek him. All right. It's been conveyed that everything that's been happening is because of their rejection of the Lord, and in their rejection, the Lord is responding not with like, oh, I'm so angry I could just destroy them. You know what, you're grounded, or whatever it might be. Everything that is happening to them is because of the result of their rejection of the Lord. It's not because God wants to do that to them, and he's choosing to do that to them. It's because they chose something that was the complete opposite of the life of the Lord. All right, so he's the one that gives life to those who seek him. It has nothing to do with the climate. It has nothing to do with the changing from day to night. It has nothing to do with the alignment of the stars. That was a big thing where they would get messages, they thought, from their gods because of the way that the stars aligned. What it is Yahweh. The next line, with a blinding flash, he destroys the stronghold and brings the fortified city to ruin. Nothing can stop or control Yahweh. All right, they may have tried to manipulate their gods into doing something for them on their behalf. All right, there's this like codependency that, we give our sacrifices to their God because they need it, and in return, their God would bless them, all right, in order for them to give their sacrifices. So there was this idea of this codependency, whereas here there's no dependency. God, if God is going to choose to have something happen, it's going to happen. There's nothing that can control Yahweh. They cannot manipulate him with different sacrifices. All right, so take careful note that God is not bound by his own creation. It's something that, hey, if you're going to choose life, you're going to get life. It's very simple. You choose going after Yahweh, you're going to get Yahweh. But if you turn your back on God, this is the result. This is what's going to happen. With a blinding flash, he destroys the stronghold and brings the fortified city to ruin. What is happening here is not God's anger after them. What's happening is that these strongholds and fortified cities are being brought to ruin because that's where they have been putting their dependence. They've put it in their army, they've put it in their prestige, their money, everything that they've tried to gain. They've put their trust in those things. And now here comes Yahweh, and he's destroying those, getting them out of the way and wiping them away, because it's not the alignment of the stars. It's not when day turns to night and night turns to day. It has nothing to do with the climate and making sure the crops are okay. It has everything to do with seek the Lord, right? Because when you seek the Lord, and the Lord is his name, that's who you're supposed to seek after, not these other things. So when you seek after him, that is where life is found. All right, so take careful note that God is not bound by his own creation. God doesn't need sacrifices. But what he does desire is that he has a people that seek after him and only him. All right, so that brings us to questions for reflection. And we'll have to recall a little bit of this chiastic form in D as we go into the next section to conclude the chiasm here. But for now, we need to remember this is the God that that Amos is serving. And this is the God that we are serving. So to have in the back of our minds as we go through these questions, like, this is a God that's mourning after people that are rejecting him. What does that say about us and how we live out our relationship with him? All right, so questions for reflection. Can I fathom God lamenting? Is there anything in my life that God would lament over or lament with me? How do I pursue after God? Is there anything I should avoid when pursuing God? Do I seek God to find him or other reasons? Will I pursue after God's righteousness? Am I willing to accept God's justice? Am I aware of the power that is in the name of the Lord? How aware am I of this when I use his name? All right. And thank you for listening in, and we'll hope to see you out there. God bless.